we're going to do this second. Just get this planned out here. There we go. There.
Great. And how are you doing, Kelly?
Good, we're good.
First of all, thank you for coming in to do this.
Oh, yeah.
So you're a friend of Art's?
Yeah, we've known each other for quite a while.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you can hear me okay, and you can see me?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so I have here my cards, so if I'm looking down at all, I'll try to just do it between your answers, but that's just what I'm looking at when I for seconds.
Okay.
So do you have any questions before we start?
If you're going to cue me, you're going to talk, right? No,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I'm speaking and
Yeah.
it's being recorded.
Yeah.
But in the editing process, we just want to be able to use only your answers.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Makes sense.
Okay. So we're going to start on the topic of emotion. And the first question is, do you think you're more or less emotional than most people?
Do I think I'm more or less emotional than most people? Less. I remember reading once, because I'm a scientist, I'm a behavioral scientist, and I remember reading once that scientists tend to be less emotional, and I can be emotional, but I don't make decisions emotionally, I don't deal with problems emotionally, I don't get mad, I don't cry. Although the last time I cried, I'd gone to an Anne Frank play, and I came out of that crying. But I think less emotional than most people.
I'm just going to pause this for 1 second. Kelly?
Yeah?
Do we have the right shot?
Oh, do I need to be in more?
I think we're going, so it's wide, medium.
We should be medium.
We should be medium?
Was that too wide?
I'm just not sure.
We can do this.
I guess what I'm asking is, are we in 3 or 4?
4.
Okay, so this would be wide, medium.
I think.
This would be medium.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, sorry about that.
Yeah, actually, I have a little afterthought on that, if you want me to patch it in.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure whether I'm less emotional or whether I have than other people or I have better controls than other people. But in terms of that balance, I'm relatively less emotional, I think, and emotion doesn't affect my decision making and problem solving so much.
And that actually leads right into the next question, which is, how good do you think you are at controlling your emotions?
I think how good am I at controlling my emotions? I think I'm good at doing the right thing despite the emotions, even though I feel the emotions. So I guess it's not so much controlling the emotions as controlling myself. And I think I do pretty well. Everybody tends to regard me as super rational, maybe too rational. The Society for Judgment Decision Making had some decision style measures on the listserv, and I took them, and I topped out the rationality scale, and there were only a small percentage of those, even in the Society for Judgment Decision Making, who topped out that scale. So I teach decision making, and I try to do what I teach.
Do you teach at PSU?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. What about how's this changed over your life at different points in your life? Your I guess relationship with your emotions.
I think I've always had a perspective on my emotions. I've always been interested in intelligence, and actually the earliest memory that's related to that, I was in the driveway of my Swedish grandparents, I think with my parents, and they opened their garage, and there was a lot of stuff in there, and I was preschool surely, and I said, "Oh, what a mess." And they were very delighted because they were very well organized people, and they liked the fact that I was concerned about organization. But I think I've always been that way.
And what about, you mentioned going to this Anne Frank play. Are there other experiences in the recent past that have made you feel more emotional?
Well, a kind of emotion I feel often and felt it today, and maybe feel it nearly every day, is an excitement of being alive. And that's an emotional experience. And I felt that good part of the morning. When I left the house, I went to go to St. Honore's Patisserie in Boulangerie for a coffee because I had a paper to review. And I do that to make myself, make it enjoyable. And the people who go there are people who tend to be happy people. And it was very nice. And then on the way back, I went into an art place that I wanted to go into, but I had time for it. And it was very good, and actually bought something. And I was just feeling good. So I had that kind of emotion I have often. I feel sadness about people elsewhere, other people. So I have that. People in Darfur, for example, that bothers me a good deal. So I'm not sure it's that I have less in the way of emotional feelings, but I don't let them determine what I do. They're relevant to what I do, but so are other considerations.
And what kinds of things do you do to, even though you're experiencing those emotions, to keep them under control or to move through them? What have you learned about your emotions over the years?
Oh, well, I can answer that very clearly because I've written about it.
Okay.
uh,
You'd have something to say on that.
yeah. I have two thoughts on that. One is a certain amount of emotional involvement is important for making good decisions, for example, performing well.
Can I pause you just for 1 second? And can I just get you to start with saying
Oh,
something to the effect of what I've learned about
good. You know, this is a very comfortable interview situation, I must say.
Good.
It really is very comfortable.
Glad.
I'm amazed. I've never had such a comfortable interview.
Nice. Oh, I'm good.
Yeah.
Good. I'm really glad to
Yeah.
hear that.
Um,
Especially despite the digital.
well, the lights is the main thing. The other is no problem at all. Yeah.
Good.
But the lights aren't even a problem because they're on me, but they're out of my visual field, which I guess was intended.
Yeah, exactly.
That's smart. Yeah. This is really quite comfortable. I have a small and I think useful number of ideas for regulating my emotions. Since I teach problem solving and decision making, I've been concerned about that. And there's a law called the Yerkes-Dodson law, which shows that if your emotion's too low, you don't perform well. If it's too high, you don't perform well. So you want it to be at an optimal level for the task. And a way to, if the emotion's too high, one way to deal with it is to take an observer perspective, to ask how you would advise somebody else to function in this situation. Another thing is you can pretend you're putting off deadlines. So if you do have a deadline and you really can't do a very good job for it, it's really a tight deadline, often you can think, okay, this is practice for other deadlines. So my real deadlines are farther off. But there are ways you can trick yourself. Freud talked about tricking yourself. He talked about the ego as being a writer, and the id, I guess, and maybe the superego as being a horse, and you have to control it. So those are some ways. I have had cancer twice, and I've faced the possibility of death, and people were amazed at how that didn't bother me. And what I did there was followed Bertrand Russell's advice to prepare yourself for the worst and then relax. And I think I did better than Bertrand Russell because I thought about what I'd do if I got the worst news, but also what I do if I got the best news. So I prepared myself for every future. I think a lot of people get upset by finding out that they're going to die or something is going to, there'll be some loss because they have no idea what they're going to do. And if they thought in advance about what to do, it takes a lot of the emotion out of it. When I found out that they had licked the cancer, I was relieved, but I was surprised at how little the relief was because I knew I would be okay either way.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you beat it.
Yeah,
That's great.
yeah.
Okay, I'm going to switch topics. Probably another one in which I have a feeling that you're going to be pretty comfortable. Um, in your life right now, how important is it that to learn new things?
How important is it to learn new things? Um, it's very important. I do it all the time. It's hard to imagine not doing that, but I do value old things that I've learned, kinds of things we've talked about, but I'm constantly building that. Somebody once said, the larger the island of knowledge, the greater the shoreline of wonder. And I just can't imagine not learning things. It's like breathing.
And how, has this changed at different points in your life? Do you remember times when you were less excited about learning new things? Or have
Oh,
you?
I think I've always been interested in learning new things, but I'm more interested now. I realize the value of it more now. And I think my values are pretty in line with the research on happiness. Um, Research on happiness shows that money isn't so important, but meaningful activity is, uh, and, um, and relationships with people.
Great. Um, how good do you consider yourself at performing your daily job and your chores and that sort of thing, things you need to do?
How good do I consider myself? Well, I can look at myself in two different ways. If I look at the whole distribution, the normal curve, actually, even with people around at Portland State, I feel I do pretty well. But I also feel obligated to compare myself with the best and the people at the top of the field of judgment and decision making. That's sort of my reference group, and it leaves a lot to be desired there. I could have had a much better career. It took me a while to catch on. I've done two things, I think, of note. The first book I wrote was a bestseller. It was used at every major school in the country and changed the way scientific method was taught at the introductory level. Now, at the end of my life, I've come up with a program which I think is the world's most user-friendly decision aid, which will be programmed by a company in California starting this June, and it will be available before marketing it. There'll be a generic version that will be available free on the internet to anybody, and that will get out to other researchers. And I want to get it out to other researchers so that I can magnify my impact so they can do things with it that I can't imagine. So even comparing myself with them, I've done something, and I guess I'm happy with that. Yeah.
So you mentioned taking a little while to catch on in your field. What do you think? What was it? What happened at the time when you started to really feel that you were grasping it and getting it?
Well, it took me a while to catch on because I was the first person in my family to go to college. So it took me a while to figure out what college was about. And then in graduate school, I had no idea about that. Now, in our department right now, we have at least a couple of people whose fathers are professors, and they know exactly what they have to do. I didn't have that advantage, so it took me a while to figure things out.
Are there other things that you had to um, learn in growing up? I guess in terms of um, being able to perform your job and that sort of thing. In terms specifically of in sorry, I'm getting stuck. In terms of intelligence, I guess the question is there are there certain wisdoms or skills that you've learned over the years that helped you to do your job better?
The other major skill I've had to learn is, or set of skills, is social skills. It's taken me a while to, my family had an unrealistic view of things. My father wound up committing suicide, became an alcoholic, committed suicide, although he had been very popular and was mayor of the town. But there were some ideas that he had that weren't very realistic or helpful to me, and my mother the same way. So I had to learn to see myself a part of society with other people and other people as part of society with me. It took a little while. I'm still learning that. I think now of the autism Asperger's continuum as being a continuum. I'm somewhere in the middle of that, I guess. I know people who are much at the high end of that. People don't talk about the high end, but have sort of radar, and they just know exactly what the other person's thinking. And I think stand-up comedians are good at this, but I'm getting better at it. I've still got a ways to go.
So it's pretty much considered nowadays that there are lots of different kinds of intelligence, as I'm sure you know,
Mm-hmm.
emotional intelligence and rational and street smarts and that sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing. Do you have an area that you feel is your strongest? I mean, we sort of covered this already, but I just want to ask it just in case there's anything to add. Do you have an area you feel is your strongest?
I think my strongest area of intelligence is it's not social, it's in the academic area, but it's not in the research theory area, although I understand and appreciate research and theory. I think it's in the area of application. I enjoy helping people make decisions. I've done that in teaching my course in personal decision making. I've done that, enjoyed doing that in consulting. I actually am the person who designed the original prioritization process for the Oregon Health Plan. I like doing that kind of thing. I've done other things like that. And so it's a matter of bringing the best research ideas and findings to practical application. There's usually a huge gap there. And that's what I did with my first book. I brought scientific method to ordinary people in a better way than had been done before. There was a big gap. It was either written for people in graduate school or it was dumbed way down. And I bridged that gap. And I think I'm doing that with my decision program.
Great. And actually, I want to ask you more about that afterwards because my partner is going to be a science teacher in high school. She's studying for that right now, so I think that she might be interested in.
I'd be interested in talking with her because actually I'm starting right now, within the next week or so, let's get this paper squared away, to write a text, high school text, to go along with this thing that's going to be produced. So I want to start talking to people in high school. I'm willing to do teaching there free, and I have a version of the program that's available right now I could use. So if she's interested in that, I'm interested in talking. We've got to get together.
Yeah, let's definitely
Yeah,
talk about
yeah.
that. Okay, so moving on.
If you know art, you always run into interesting people.
Yeah, for sure. No, yeah, I'm beginning to see that.
Yeah.
Other things that are harder for you to remember now?
Oh, as I get older, what's harder to remember? It's names. It's names. I don't have any trouble with, well, and details, I guess. The thing I remember best is procedures and theories and the kind of thing that most people seem to have trouble with. The kind of thing I don't remember so well is what we had for dinner when we went out last week, which is not important at all to me, and that may be one reason I've never been good at that. My wife's very good at it, so together we complement one another and we cover all the bases. But the other thing is I have trouble remembering names, even of people in my field whose names I want to remember and regard it as important to remember. So names are going, but the research shows, the research I know, that as you get older, you don't forget the names. It just takes longer to recall them. So I'm patient with myself, unlike my father was never patient with himself on that score. It always irritated me. And the names will usually come.
What about things that are easier? Anything come easier now in terms of memory?
We probably want to turn my phone off.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Do you want me to get that?
Yeah, please.
Let's see. No, there it is. Yeah. Oops. Whoop. Here we go. Yeah. This is it. Right. Yeah. I should have thought to turn it off.
Oh, that's okay.
Oh, here it is. Okay. Just put this here. Okay. And I've got this phone. I just got a Droid, and it's wonderful. Silencing it is very easy. It's I just love the thing. Okay, we'll put this over here, and I think we're okay.
Yep, looks good. All right. Things that are easier to remember. Anything?
Is anything easier to remember? I don't. Well, things I do more easily are things like a decision analysis or helping people with certain things that they're skills I've repeated and I get better at. They're skills, really. That's what the skills are getting better and better, although it's a learning curve. The big increases early on, and it's just polishing things up. But I wouldn't say generally that anything's getting easier to remember other than that.
Okay. And how do you think that your intelligence is going to change in the next 10 or 20 years?
How do I think my intelligence is going to change in the next 10 or 20 years? Probably not going to be around here that long. Yeah, I really don't know. I've known people, of course, who've gotten Alzheimer's, nobody in my family. I've also known, I remember very well, my brother-in-law's father who became quite old, and his mind was always just as sharp as a 20-year-old's. He hadn't lost a brain cell. So I'd have to guess that I'll be in that category, or somewhere in between maybe. Yeah.
You know, can I ask a question again, and can I just have you say, you started by saying you don't really know. Can I just have you include the words where I'll be in terms of intelligence in that sentence? Because I feel like
Yeah.
I think that we could definitely use what you just said there, and
Okay. You know, would it be a good way to run this thing? Because you're almost perfect on the way this interview goes. I think it's really well thought out.
yeah,
But if you had a little screen with the question when it came up,
yeah.
it would not only prompt me to repeat the question, but it would have the question there in case I'd forgotten
Right.
it.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, if you did that every time,
Right.
Where do I think my intelligence will be in the next few years? Whether the range of possibilities is great because I've known a number of people who've gotten Alzheimer's disease, very smart people who've gotten Alzheimer's disease. I think in particular of a professor at the University of Oregon who had serious Alzheimer's disease. And then I think of the father of my brother-in-law who became quite old and was just as sharp as a tack. It was very clear. He was as clear as a 20-year-old. He even had a sense of humor about himself. He was just very natural and fun to be with, even though his body was falling apart. So that's the range. I'll be somewhere in between them. I think probably near the good end of that, because there's no Alzheimer's in my family.
That's good to hear. All right, so I'm going to switch topics.
Hmm.
How important is it to you that people find you attractive?
How important is it to me that people find me attractive? That's an interesting question. I've when I was in the fourth grade and fifth grade and on up through school, um, girls always liked me. So I started off feeling that people thought I was attractive. Um, I do care about how I dress. Even more recently, if I go to the dermatologist and the dermatologist zaps a little precancerous stuff in my face, I'm not too happy about that. So I guess that's all normal stuff. But I saw a guy just the other day whose nose had turned sort of a dark black, blue black. And he was very natural about it. And I thought that's the way I would hope to be about that. I think I would be. It's just something you accept. There are people with, extreme distortions in their faces, and it becomes hard to interact with people. I guess I that's where I'd come down is if it interfered with my relationships with people, that would be a problem. But it's a little hard question to answer.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
How much time do you think that you spend thinking about your appearance or adjusting on a daily basis?
Oh, how much time do I spend thinking about my appearance? Zero. I don't think about that at all. The one thing I do these days, and I'm not sure it's just appearance, but as I get older, I've tended to have and I have a lot of problems with my back that I've had a bent back, which my wife gets after me for, and I'm glad she does. And I will look in a mirror, look at my reflection, because it doesn't look good to be bent over, and it's not good either. And so I think I walk pretty straight now, and what I've found is some pains go away as I've done that. So that's a mixture of appearance and health. Um, but usually I don't think at all about it.
Okay. I'm glad to hear your back's feeling better.
Yeah.
Um, is there, in what ways are you most comfortable with your physical appearance?
Oh, in what ways am I most comfortable? Well, I used to be a gymnast. I used to be fairly athletic. And I remember I used to think if I wanted to be well dressed for something, actually a thing I would wear often is some light pants and a dark blue T-shirt, because I thought a good build is the best way to dress. So I guess that's an answer to that. Um,
Okay, that works.
yeah.
And what about, are there ways in which you're less comfortable with your appearance?
Ways in which I'm less comfortable with my appearance. I can't think of any really. I guess I have a sort of a sharp profile. Um, I don't think about it much though. But I remember meeting a guy in a restaurant who looked very much like me, and I was very excited about that. I went over and I said, we look alike. He didn't like that. He was uncomfortable with that.
Huh.
I was comfortable with it.
Uh-huh.
So that's data. How you interpret the data, I don't know. Yeah.
And you sort of mentioned this already with being physically active, but how's your thoughts or your feelings about physical appearance changed at different stages in your life?
My thoughts about physical appearance change in different phases of my life. I uh, I really can't think of any. Well, as I get older, my body's fallen apart, and but that's part of life. And I look at life as a trajectory. I don't look at just now. I'm on a curve, and I like the trajectory, and this is part of it, and so I accept that. But one thing I'm reluctant to do, frankly, is go out in a swimming suit now. Now, people who look worse than me do it, but I'm used to looking pretty good, and so I'm reluctant to do that.
Um, and again, so a lot of these questions are kind of repetitive, but as you get older, do you think that you'll be more or less concerned about your appearance?
As I get older, I think I'll be less concerned about my appearance. It's not, yeah, I think I'll just be less concerned about it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we pretty much covered that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to switch topics. Um, what do you think will happen to you after you die? After you pass away?
My answer to the question is what happens after death. Well, I have two answers, probably about the same as before birth. And the other one is,
Can I stop you just because
yeah,
you started to say the question back but actually didn't get it. So you could either repeat the question or you can just say after I die and then continue.
oh,
Either way.
oh, what, I thought I did repeat it.
You did, but it was really kind of quick, and I think I might have actually been talking over you.
Oh, okay, okay,
So
fine.
do you want me to ask again?
No, no,
Okay.
I got it,
All
yeah.
right.
My memory isn't that bad. What do I think will have to happen after I die? I think about the same thing that happened before I was born. One way I think about that is if I have some pebbles arranged in a triangle, and then I pick them up, the triangle's gone. And that's what happens to me. The pattern's gone. I'm a pattern. Um, if you look at yourself from the outside, that's easy to imagine. If you look at yourself from the inside, it's impossible to imagine the subjective experience of not being there. And so I think that's what makes that a little hard, and some people have a hard time getting out of that subjective mode. Um, and I find it very comforting. One thing Christians say is, "Death, where is thy sting?" I say, "Yeah, death, where is thy sting?" There's nothing to it. And it's sort of, I know things, I know that's always there as an option. You know, if things got really bad, that's no problem. So I find it very comforting to think that. There are these efforts to, well, extrasensory perception, things like that. I've followed them and read them, and a fellow whose name escapes me, actually, he's a Reed graduate, has done the best work on that. Um, he he's and I follow that, and I'm intrigued by it, but I don't see any evidence really yet that's at all clear. He's come the closest to it. Um, so that's where I am. There's no reason to believe that there's anything there at all.
And just a minute ago, you said that that's always an option. What were you referring to?
Oh, death as an option. Well, if it's, I mean, if life gets too bad, uh, I think rational suicide is something I have no problem with. Um, I think suicide's often a bad decision because, as clinicians say, it's a permanent solution for a temporary problem. But there are people. Hemingway committed suicide. He was in great pain. I guess there was nothing he could do about it. I have no problem with that. My father committed suicide. That could have been avoided. And the reason he did that is he wasn't willing to look at himself honestly. And I've been very interested ever since in defensive avoidance, and tried to look at myself honestly. And I have a brother who's a fundamentalist and has a way of looking at things that he's always having to explain reality because it doesn't fit his belief system well. And I don't have much trouble with reality. Uh, I think it's good to accept reality and build it into your way of thinking, and you avoid a lot of problems.
Okay, that's what I thought you were. That's what I thought you were mentioning
Mm-hmm.
or referencing when you said that. What about at different stages in your life? Have you always had kind of similar ideas about death, or did you have different ideas as you were younger?
There was a period in my life when I might have had different ideas about death. I was I went to Sunday school. My folks sent me to Sunday school. It was a Methodist one. It wasn't a very extreme religion. They never went to church, so it isn't as though we came from a religious family. And that became a little more important to me when I was being, at least I thought, pursued by a bully in high school and didn't really know how to deal with it. And so I actually read the Bible with regularity. I don't know that I thought about life after death at that point. That wasn't what I was thinking about. I guess I was looking for some help with the problem. And so I'm not sure. I'm not sure. When I was a little kid, of course, I believed all sorts of things. But no, I don't think I've had much different beliefs about that ever.
And I'm curious, when you were a teenager and you were reading the Bible, um, specifically to find help with that problem, did you find help? Did you find something that was
Did I
comforting?
find help from the Bible? Well, I think probably only because I thought I found help, or because it kept me from thinking I had no help. I don't think there was anything of substance that came from that at all. Um, I, uh, I think some serious, realistic problem solving would have been a better thing. And I actually had a chance to. This is probably a little. It's the story actually is irrelevant to what we're talking about now, so I won't get off on a tangent.
Um, so again, we've sort of covered this one already, but when you think about dying, is there any fear there?
No, there's no fear about dying at all. No. As I say, at one point with my cancer, I thought there was a good chance I was going to die. And people often say, when they've been through something like that, it really changed their view, and they've thought differently about things ever since. I say I didn't learn a darn thing. I had it all figured out beforehand. I had no problem with the fact that I was facing death. I had no problem with the fact that I was continuing to live. And I know when it comes up again, I'll handle it fine. And I guess we all die, but we differ in the way we handle death. And the thing we can do is be bigger than death. That's what I want to do, is be bigger than death. So I want to be able to laugh in its face, and I think I can do that.
Have you had to experience the passing of a loved one?
I've had I haven't had a lot of experience with loved ones dying, although my first experience of death was my, I guess, grandfather dying. I was so little I didn't really remember that. Then I remember my grandmother dying, and I'd thought about that, and it was a little puzzling thing. It wasn't a big emotional experience. Then my brother, half-brother, died, 10 years ago, maybe. And that was very well handled. And it was a very nice memorial. And so that was not a problem. My mother died at 101 and a half recently. She was saying she'd lived too long for a while. And so that was, although we miss her. And I've actually, I'm going to send my sister, we talk about her often as though she's still around. My wife and I talk about her parents. Well, they died. Actually, I watched my wife's mother die, and saw the heart rate thing go to flat. And but it was the right time. It was right. I guess what bothers me, these are all deaths that were timely. What bothers me is a death that's untimely, especially where somebody had a lot of promise and could have made a lot of their life. So that's so I haven't really experienced that kind of death that I can recall.
And it sounds like your experiences of losing loved ones, that you've been at peace with that. How do you think that those experiences have changed you?
I don't think the experiences of loved ones dying have changed me any more than the threat of dying myself. I think I'd thought enough about those possibilities in advance, so they weren't problems. We lose all kinds of things. I think of the courtier. Was it the courtier? No, it's not the courtier. It's Jedermann. It's the everyman play. And the everyman play, which is, I guess, German, it's put on in Austria, in Salzburg, every year. And I saw it in Salzburg. Jedermann, everyman, is proud of all the good things he's done, and he thinks that's going to serve him well in the afterlife. And he's proud of this, that, and the other thing. And what he learns through the play is that none of this counts. You lose all of that. That's not part of you. And Erickson also talked about giving things up at the end of life. So I know I have to give things up. I've had to give up a lot of physical abilities. I had to sell my sailboat. I like sailing. Wouldn't be safe for me to, well, I had a back problem, so I couldn't raise the mast. It was a trailable boat and couldn't lift the trailer tongue, and people are amazed that that was really no loss to me. Although I like sailing, I think about it. Um, it's these things just happen, and so that wasn't disturbing at all.
So last topic. How important is sex at this point in your life?
At this point in my life, not at all. It was at one time.
Can I pause you and
Sure.
just we
Oh,
just want to get the question or the word
sure.
sex
Yeah.
first.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
Uh, how important is sex at this point in my life? It's not at all important. For medical reasons, I'm sexually inactive, and and actually, this is something I anticipated also that would not be a big deal. In a way, it's sort of liberating. There's an old theory of motivation that goes back to Clark Hull that all drives are aversive, and even sexual drive, and it's sort of like an itch, and you know it's good to scratch an itch, but you'd rather not have the itch. And I don't think that theory is really completely right, but I think it's not completely wrong. So that hasn't been a real loss. Uh,
And what does that word aversive mean?
the word aversive means something that we avoid, something that's negative, like an electric shock. And so that if you have scratching an itch feels good, and that's positive, but the itch itself is aversive. And the reason the scratching feels good is because it gets rid of the aversive stimulation. So that was an early theory of motivation. I don't follow the literature on motivation, but I know last I taught that kind of thing, it had gone beyond that. I suspect there's still something to that that's not entirely wrong, but I don't know where current thinking is on that.
Okay. And what role has sex played earlier in your life?
Sex earlier in my life, sex has had an important role, not a dominating role. I've had not a large number of relationships in my life, was really slow to get going on dating because of the social skills I had not learned. Um, my wife was very attractive, and we had a very good relationship until we both ran out of gas. But she's still actually quite attractive, and that was important to me. And I sort of, it bothered me in a way that it was important, but it was. And so I guess that it was pretty important at that time.
Um, so being sexually inactive, I can imagine probably that your feelings aren't. I mean, you're probably that's probably your feelings about sex probably won't change much. But do you think? I mean, well, I guess maybe I shouldn't put words in your mouth. Do you think that your feelings about sex will change in the next 10 or 20 years?
I don't think my feelings about sex will change because there's nothing to change it. It's gone from my life. Um, I don't see any reason for it to change. Yeah.
Yeah, I had yeah. Okay. So what? Well, actually, no. I have one more question, but I'm gonna save that to come out, and I'm gonna get Kelly, and we're gonna just shoot from a different angle for this
Mm-hmm.
last question. It gives us something to edit with.
Okay.
So I'll just be a sec.
Okay. Yeah, this was an amazingly comfortable interview situation.
Just let me know when you're ready. So, what do you think is the most important sexual issue facing people your age?
What is the most important sexual issue facing people my age? It's something I just don't think about at all. I just have no opinion. But something I don't think about at all. Uh, I, um, I guess As part of a broader thing, a lot of people don't accept getting old. They don't accept losing abilities, so I think that's the problem. And it's not just focused on sex. It's focused on a lot of things. People aren't willing to accept their age, and I think that's not attractive. I find people who accept reality attractive. Yeah,
I agree.
yeah.
Do we need a little more? Or?
Yeah, if we could get a little hand gesture, that would be good.
Okay. So.
You want me to make something up?
No, don't.
No, no,
Don't
no,
feel
no,
like
no.
you have to.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what advice would you have for yourself 20 years ago regarding sex?
What advice would I have for myself 20 years ago regarding sex? I I think again that's part of a bigger picture, and it has to do with interpersonal relationships. And I I was there was a barrier to cross, a social barrier to cross with women that I don't feel anymore at all. Um, and I wish I could have seen earlier how much alike we are and how easy things are. I imagine problems that didn't exist. The problems were in my head, and if I'd had a better understanding of that, and also part of it's just plain old social skills. How do you make small talk, for example? I didn't know how to do that kind of thing. So what I've what I found is at first, although I say women had always been attracted to me, I never really started dating till later. But then I found that I was really quite good at flirting and getting close to gals. So I got better at it and enjoy women a great deal, and still do, although I don't do anything about it. Um, so I wished I could have gotten going on that path earlier. And I guess I was dealing with a lot of myths, false beliefs. So,
There are a lot out there.
a lot out there, yeah, yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, well, it was fun.
Yeah,
That
thanks.
was really